Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction, and I hope I will live up to your expectations. But before that, let me set the expectations right. How many of you believe that I can give you a success formula now in next 1 hour? You can just raise a hand there. You can just click on the raising hand. Oh, yeah, there are a couple of them who are looking for success formula from me. That's interesting. Is it possible? Is it so easy to case probably the entire population would have joined this session, right? So yeah, but then what is the difficulty? The difficulty is the definition of the success depends on oneself. Okay, for me the success could be something else, and for Shubham or Abhishek or Sandeep, the success could be some different. So, but what I will do is I will share my learnings in my whatever little I have contributed to semiconductor industry, and probably if you can try that, there is a good scope of being successful is what I can assure you. And again, another thing is it depends. As I said, the definition of the success depends on how you take it, right? For me, success could be getting the VLSI chip first time, right? But for somebody else, success could be earning 10 crores, right, in a year. So it depends on how you define the success. But yeah, I will just share my screen. Is that the right expectation? Are you all okay with it? Just give me a second. Yeah. Are you all able to see my screen? Yeah.
Yes, we can see the screen.
All right. So the topic was weird, how to be successful professional in the field of semiconductors and VLSI. To be successful in the semiconductor, the first thing is we need to be aware of the semiconductor industry itself, right? That's the foremost thing. Just give me a second. I will stop my video to save my bandwidth. 1 second. Yeah. So are you able to see the screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right.
It was visible. It went away. It was visible earlier.
Okay, just give me a second. Is it visible now?
Yes, it's visible now.
All right, all right. Yeah. So it is very important to know the field we are talking about, the trends in the industry, the semiconductor area, what is happening, and to know in depth, I mean in detail, the industry, the trends, how it is going, and what is happening. So it is interesting to see that semiconductor market is soon going to be uh, half a trillion business, like it is soon going to hit 500 plus billion market globally. And you can see this, and soon it's going to be a trillion market by 2030. So that is quite an interesting, that also shows us a kind of a market size we have, and how much we can grab. So each of you have a share you can define to grab into this market. So another interesting recent phenomena we have seen because of COVID and slowdown is that the shortage of semiconductor chips, right? I'm sure all of you would have read about it. There are a lot of, because of the slowdown in the entire semiconductor arena, the fabs stopped, and we couldn't design in an efficient way. Right, because of many other reasons, there were a big shortage of semiconductor chips, and the entire country's focus, the various countries diverted their focus to the pandemic, and hence even like any other field, even semiconductor market suffered from it, and resulting into a huge shortage. And that is in a time where it was growing phenomenally because of various other factors, various enablers, which we are going to see soon. So there is still a huge shortage. So now it is a double opportunity for you all guys, that we have to come up to speed first and then grow for the emerging market trends. So that is a double opportunity one can look for as a VLSI or a semiconductor professional. That's the first and foremost thing. Again, the entire drivers for this phenomenal growth expectation from semiconductor industry is, as usual, the artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, where we want everything around us to be smart and intelligent, and the autonomous vehicles, which soon is going to be, it's a big buzzword of today. And I'm sure you all would have read it, that it is basically there are more electronics in a autonomous car than a mechanical parts, right? So, and then the 5G, another phenomenal contributor for the growth or the demand for semiconductor space is the 5G. And going forward, it will be 6G. And because we all know the kind of the Gen Z's appetite for data, right? I mean, today's kids are born with internet. So, you know how much of appetite the Gen Z has on data. And also, they are the first generation techpreneurs, I would call them, because they're born with internet. They were born with so much of data. And of course, there has to be the computing power and the communication means to use the data and process the data and communicate it, and then for the betterment of the society. So there is a huge opportunity here. And these are the market drivers for semiconductors also. And let us get into details how each of these affect the VLSI and semiconductor industry in a minute. So another interesting thing one can observe is that the application driving semiconductor companies' revenue for the next couple of years, that is from 2021. I mean, it's currently how it is going. Apart from these major drivers which I talked about, there are wireless communication technologies, which is predominantly the 5Gs and Wi-Fi 6 and those kind of technologies which are going to govern the semiconductor space as well. And the automotive, of course, I talked about it, artificial intelligence, consumer electronics. When we want everything around us to be smart and intelligent, of course, even the consumer electronic gadgets or the products have to be intelligent, smart. So that requires semiconductor chips. And the data centers, the amount of data we generate in a day, if that has to be processed, it has to be a data centers, the huge data centers and the storage, which has to be very intelligent and smart enough to process the required data, right? I mean, to deep dive into the data and then process them. And then the cloud computing, again, the data space, the communication to reach the cloud, and then the analytics, and all these require semiconductor as a solution platform wherein all this processing can be done. Then there are power technologies, which of course we are seeing all the energy meters and other energy sector products are getting smart and which requires a semiconductor device. Industrial equipment, we are also looking at manufacturing, Industry 4.0, driving the industrial Internet of Things, where the entire manufacturing and processing are getting automated, right? And of course, when we are talking about this kind of a platform where communication is the key, we have to be worrying about the security of the data also. Security, privacy, and there are various parts of security when it comes to data protection. Then, of course, the medical device, semiconductor, of course, impacts all other domains like medical, healthcare, robotics, agriculture. So all other applications require a kind of solution which is based on the semiconductor solutions. So then wireline communication, the fiber optics, right? I mean, fiber technologies. So they need semiconductor solutions. Then augmented reality and the virtual reality space, they require the infotainment, right? The kind of data. Now, all of you would have experienced. I don't think we would anyway want to go out for infotainment, right? So the kind of IoT, the kind of platforms we have today for the video streaming and all, it requires a huge amount of huge amount of computing and processing power and the communication capabilities, so that seamlessly, without any loss of quality, we get to see the entertainment. We get the entertainment. Okay, that's a virtual reality and augmented reality applications. Of course, personal computers are going to continue to be there in a different forms, probably in many other forms like iPad or any smaller gadgets which we can carry in our pockets. So all these things, if you see here, that is what is happening in the present days. If you see, this is a time frame when you are talking about what are the things which are important, which requires a semiconductor solutions. These are the factors, if you see here, which is going to retain its importance level even going forward. Okay, in 2021, this year also, and again, scenario will not change, but it will definitely aggravate further going forward in the 2020-22 onwards as well. Okay, so what has happened over the decades? So during my career, if you see, for last 30 years, for last 30 years and beyond, we have seen a simple transistor which got invented, which gave birth to ICs, and then today we have multi-core ICs which requires multiple processors, huge memory on chip, and the protocols, various protocols, and number of interfaces cores which are integrated into semiconductor piece, and all onto a silicon chip. So again, there is another interesting thing happened in the last year is the huge the wafer, the entire chip, palm-sized chip. I'm sure most of you would have seen. So all these decades we were working on miniaturization, right? That is what is called Moore. So Moore's law we believed, and then we made it happen over the decades of years. But today, suddenly last year, if you see, wafer-sized chip was fabricated, which is the wafer size single chip. So one can imagine this. The claim is that it has to be that big a chip for the kind of a memory it requires, for the kind of a computing processor it needs. So it is required to be a palm-sized chip, which is the largest chip which was fabricated last year. So this is a new thinking which we took time. We as a professional VLSI people who are conventional in thinking, it was really a surprise to think that, okay, do we need a larger chip, right? So the claim is that for the kind of AI and the data processing of today, the claim is that it requires that huge memory on chip and that huge computing processor on chip. So it's the chip size can still be very big of the order of palm size, and still it can be on demand to meet the demands of the current data processing and AI and ML kind of a application. So this is an interesting turn which has happened in the recent year. Now, of course, over the years, the silicon complexity, all of us know how it has gone high. I mean, how the complexity has increased over the years, right? I mean, we were just doing a small interface protocol processing in the chip when I started my career 25, 30 years back. We were doing HDLC controllers. It was a simple packet processing protocol which we used to do. That used to be the VLSI chip, okay, with the entire processor, memory, everything on the board, but only a basic processing engine used to be the VLSI chip. But today when we are talking about multiple processing cores. It could be RISC processors, DSP processors, interfaces, bus interfaces, and lot of interface cores on chip. And of course, today we are also talking about the memory with the software, right? A firmware loaded, so bootloader. So it is becoming that complex. And imagine this is the complexity of the chip, which we cannot even think. I cannot even identify what is what in this figure in B, whatever is shown here. So I can, even if I can think, I can't really get into the details of how is it connected, what is connected with what other peripheral it is talking to. All those things is really, really difficult, right? That's the kind of a complexity we are talking about. So comparing, just understanding the complexity in terms of processing. So it is interesting to see that it is easy to study the kind of a processing or the functionality which has grown over the years. You taking a vision processing as an example. Today, vision processing, like if it has to really identify a finer nuances of the twins, for example. I mean, it has to identify a person, to identify a thing, to identify any particular thing, to differentiate it from the rest of them. It requires a huge processing power, right? Huge processing power, and it has to collect the kind of details, right? It has to really collect, store it, process it, compare it with the surroundings to identify it. So that, interestingly, what has happened is this uses the CNN techniques and AI techniques to do the classification, image processing and classification, and to get the final details of image recognition itself. Today, in the last 5 years, we have seen that the processors are capable of identifying the images and the video with the fineness beyond human possibilities, right? That means that the machine can identify things much better than the humans. Humans can make mistakes, but machines cannot. Why does human make mistakes? Because of the fatigue, because of the limitation in information processing. Whereas the fast processing computing processor or the image processor can identify perfectly the image or the video by processing it, because it doesn't have a kind of the fatigue which human undergoes, right? So one can imagine the kind of a system architecture, system functionality, or the system performances which is being achieved in recent past. And this is going to continue, and we are going to see phenomenal improvement as the very exciting solutions we will get to see in future going forward also. Okay, and this machine learning and artificial intelligence is going to be the big thing impacting semiconductor solutions also in all our all various areas. It could be IoTs, it could be image processing or video processing or infotainment or agriculture or drone technology. You name it, you will get virtual reality, right? I mean, the kind of experiences one gets when by using these technology is really beyond imagination. You can imagine, and it is no longer fiction anymore. It is a reality today, right? And also, just I've taken data only for recent years, the current data, which I felt that you people also can really dig through and then get this data very easily, can connect to this, collect this data and then believe in this. So from that angle, if I see here, the set goals are that the entire mobiles which are available, all the mobiles which are available are going to be intelligent by 2021. Of course, we all know it, right? I mean, we all know it now, how the mobile capabilities are changing over the years, right? Today, mobile will track your activities, and it will tell you when to go to office, when to sleep, when to get up, when to do exercise, how long you are standing, how long you are staring, what is your screen times. Everything it knows about you, probably more than what you know about yourself, right? That's the kind of mobile smartphones we have today. Then more than 50% of the data center chips are going to be intelligent by 2022. And 2022 is not long time. It is hardly a few months away, right? And we are going to see all the data centers. Imagine today we are talking about cloud computing with this kind of an efficiency. If all other 50% becomes very intelligent, one can imagine the kind of cloud computing capabilities we will have, right? Today you have Alexas and you have a lot of assists at home assists, right? Which is artificial intelligent assist, which you have, which tracks you everything at home as well, right? And of course, the autonomous vehicles are going to be the next big thing, and most of them is supported by the kind of a system on chip, right? Very intelligent system on chip. And imagine how powerful these solutions are to be. I think it is only in our hands to, I mean, it is left to the individual's imagination, right? I mean, if it has to really detect all surrounding vehicles, which is moving at the speed of say 120 to 200 kilometers per hour, imagine the kind of processing which has to happen in the chip, the electronics inside the cars, right? And then if it has to really recognize slow moving say cow or something coming in the way, and it has to really automatically stop and then protect it. One can imagine the kind of a processing or the real time processing capabilities required in those kind of solutions, right? And greater than 20% of the IoTs are intelligent by 2022. Imagine we are still setting the trend of only 20% of the things around us are going to be intelligent. Imagine what happens when we have 100% of things intelligent around. And that is the scope we are going to see going forward, right? The next 10 years is it is IoT, AI, ML, and VLSI. That is for sure, that is going to be the market. And each one of us have our own share to contribute if we can. So it is very essential for us to get into understand this market segment and get those skills which are relevant, which are required for us to really contribute, make us capable of contributing. And of course, the past learning can only set the track, set the foundation for you to grow beyond. But no, it is not enough to just have, okay, yesterday I have done this course. My PhD of 2008 is of no use today unless I upgrade myself to what is happening today, right? I mean, those degrees, those things, it has definitely, I don't say that it is useless, but definitely it will just set the foundation for me to do a self-learning, self-understand what is the requirement, and then go and grab those skills and then be able to contribute. Again, just to talking about AI further, I was just again emphasizing more on the kind of a functionality one has to have. So if it has to just recognize these people here, there is a lady with a boy and a girl trying to cross the road, it has to really learn so much of data, image database it has to learn, and then that's how it gets trained, right? And then saves that data and then understands each one's unique properties. And to kind of processing it requires, for the huge image database to get processed, of course, you need a kind of a data center, right? Kind of an performance. So the computing performance necessary for just identifying, classifying the things is the data center kind of a solution you need. Then once you do that, the inference engine again has to really pull out what it has learned and then apply to the new data. Then it can classify saying that yes, it is a woman, it is a boy, it is a girl, there is a zebra crossing, they are waiting. Just to get these classes, it has to do a huge set of data processing in the kind of an environment like a data center, and it has to apply its own advanced algorithms like CNN, etc., and then classify them into accurately classify into the objects and then differentiate them. And imagine this is a static thing. Imagine if it has to be dynamic, what kind of a real-time processing needs are there, right? And accordingly, and that is capable. We have technology today to do that, right? So that is where we are heading to. So in real time, so we saw a simple case where we had to identify the objects there, identify people there, and then say that what is happening. Now imagine that in a dynamic situation where in autonomous car, so it has to identify, it has to keep track of all its surroundings, the persons, tracking the slow and the fast things around it, the static things and the dynamic things, and identify each of them, which can be relevant only for some time, right? Here it is, this situation is relevant for this car only for till it crosses this. Probably beyond this, that things have changed here. So it is continuously, it has to process. It has to flush the data, what it has done, what is not relevant, again capture the new data, again process it, store it, and if required, take action and then move on. right? That's the kind of a real-time activities, real-time processing required. Imagine the kind of a complexity the system on chip will have to do this kind of a dynamically intelligent decisions, to take dynamically intelligent decisions, which we call it artificial intelligence or machine learning kind of algorithms. To run that, one can imagine the kind of complexity in terms of functionality the system on chip will have. Okay, in the past, at least during my career, we were all guided by the IRTS, which is nothing but the International Roadmap for Semiconductors. So basically, they used to define the roadmap for semiconductors, where they said that, okay, we have to do the process integration, the devices and the structures will change, the interconnects and system drivers have to get integrated, the factory integration and MEMS. So what we have seen is the migration from homogeneous kind of a miniaturization to a heterogeneous integration, which is nothing but the more than more, right? Which is basically the diversification, where we had analogs, passives, and sensors, actuators, biochips, everything getting integrated, which may be of different fabrication processes. Like basically, if you see sensors, actuators, and passives and all, there are CMOS compatible processing techniques. So those are the chips which not necessarily CMOS technology, but CMOS-like technologies. The trend started to integrate these. Of course, we all are familiar with Moore's law. So Moore's law miniaturization is Moore, so which is basically the miniaturization, which today we are talking about productionizing 7 nanometer technology, right? That is a CMOS technology. So here we soon recognize the need for integrating heterogeneous technologies. That means CMOS compatible technologies, like either it could be in the SIP, which is a system in package, or it could be MEMS devices integrated into package. It could be multiple dies integrated into package. So those we started working on, and which enabled us today to integrate sensors, actuators, RF chips, and even the transceivers, a lot of the millimeter devices. All those things have gone into the silicon today. So we cut across this, and this was the roadmap which we were following, right? During my career, at least till date, we were following these kind of a roadmaps. So, but today, what are we seeing? Again, with some people arguing that Moore's law is coming to an end and all, this was the route we followed, and then we tried integrating with a lot of other CMOS-like chips into a single package. So that all the systems used to be the heterogeneous integration. Now, we have to think beyond now. It is not enough for all the people who are aspirants of VLSI or the systems today. No longer it is just a VLSI or it's just a CMOS. It is much beyond that. It's much beyond that, where we are talking about the system. It is the system, end-to-end system, right from the device, right from the communication, right from the physical channel, right from the processing to the software, the firmware, all firmware, middleware, and the application layer, and the communication beyond, that is the internet, then the cloud interface. So if you see, the system is overall. So it is not necessary just I just designed the system and then I verify it, and that is not enough anymore. So basically we are talking about system integration with outside system connectivity, heterogeneous integration, which talks about integrating everything around, and more than more, which is again a heterogeneous CMOS compatible processing devices. And then beyond CMOS, those are the sensors, actuators, and RF, etc. Then more is a miniaturized, which again the trend is really still continuing to grow towards miniaturizing further beyond 7 nanometer, 3 nanometer. And today we are also talking about surround gate transistors and single electron transistors and all. So still miniaturization is a hope today, right? So as we are chasing that, we are also chasing the heterogeneously the system integrations of CMOS compatible, CMOS-like. It need not be only CMOS, but it could be much bigger than other than CMOS also. So the systems of today doesn't restrict itself to the silicon or a small part of the system, but it has gone beyond the system. Okay, so that, and even the IRTS, which was the defining body, has named itself to IRDS, which is International Organization for Devices and Systems. It's no longer IRTS, but it is a IRDS. Okay, that's a body which has defined various working groups, which is working on each of these functionalities and making a bigger global perspective of the system getting integrated. And so that is also a learning for us, that we don't have to restrict ourselves to be in electronics or to be a specialist in nanotech or the CMOS engineering or MEMS engineering or any of the things which we had as a conventional or a traditional thinking, right? We have to go much beyond that to build a system of today. So at least we have to model them. At least we have to really understand the system requirements in a much bigger or global perspective to make it work. All right. So just a recap on design flow. I'm sure all of you are either VLSI aspirants or probably working in any of these areas, know about it. But just to recap, we have some functional specs and which we do modeling of them. And then once we have a modeling, we derive certain system parameters and then get the microarchitecture defined. Once we have the microarchitecture, we use HDL or various other techniques to actually do RTL coding, and then we integrate them. Module integration is the next step. And of course, as we build each of these functions, we do the verification, plan the test case, identify them. We do the verification plan, test case identification. We verify each of these functionals through simulations, emulations, and validate them. Once we validate them on a system, once we gain confidence in those models, we integrate them. Then we go on to the AutoFlow, where it is the synthesis. Again, it is not necessarily the tool dominant, though it is tool dominant process. There's a lot of intelligence required from the design engineer to feed the constraint, to get the constraints. Because remember, we are talking about not just a VLSI chip, but the entire system. So you need to know the system operations, operating modes, and the kind of requirements, the power requirements. So today we are no longer defining the design goal as power timing and area, but it is much bigger today. Even power was, during my career, power was very the third priority. We were worried about timing. So that was our thing. And the area, of course, it has to be within the business goals. I mean, it was the area used to be defined based on many other factors. And as an engineer, our goal used to just maintain it within the area which was defined for us, right? As a business case. So predominantly, our design goal was restricted to only timing. So meet the timing, your design will work. So that used to be our design goal. But today, it's no longer the case. Today, we have retermed that also as a PPA, which is nothing but the performance, power, and the area. So in a bigger way, in the bigger perspective of the system. So in each of the system will have multiple modes. The system may have the kind of a complexity I just talked about, right? Heterogeneous and integrations, macro integrations, and each of them will have its own design constraints. And then testability part. So we need to worry about the testability. Then the physical design process consisting of floor planning, place and route. Each of the device, each of these processes have become I would say 20 to 30 times more complex than what we had started 20 years back. 20, 30 years back, we used to do hand layout for SRAMs and all. I literally used to draw the interconnects and all. But today, it is the tool can do, and tool can do much better than whatever we had done then. But still, it requires a kind of a guidance. It requires a kind of a design decisions which have to be made with the expertise and with the knowledgeable decisions are to be made to take it through the physical design process itself. It could be place and route, it could be placing, it could be CTS, it could be anything, any of the process flows, right? It has become that complex today. And it requires really intelligent decisions to be made with experience, with the kind of expertise. So yeah, then you do all the physical design verifications like static timing analysis, equivalence checking, DRC, ERC checkings, and IR checks. And then finally you do the tape out, which is for the fabrication. So this is in brief the design flow. Though the flow looks very simple, each of these processes have gone many times in terms of the complexity. Okay, so it is required at each level. Even if you say that, okay, I'm a system Verilog expert, it is not enough to know the language. It is, you have to understand the system, you have to understand the functionality, you have to understand the timing aspect of it, you have to understand what kind of shells one has to use, what is the kind of a library you use, how do you decide on the fabrication process, everything, and to arrive at the design goal, PPA goal of the system. So yeah, as I said, the design is no longer starting from scratch. Have the ready-made course which you can bundle them together or integrate together and realize a complex system, right? No systems of today gets designed from the scratch. So you, by all interface design course are available, will be available in some form or the other. You will have processors available in some form or the other. You will have protocol blocks available in some form or the other. Probably a small part of, say, 20 to 25%, which is a proprietary part of the system, will be designed from the scratch. You take any thing, so most of the 75% of the system modules are available, which is bought out of shelf, and then they are integrated with the small part which is proprietary, which will be integrated. And of course, the integration can happen at any stage. Integration right from GDS stage, which is the last but one stage of the chip. You can have integration happen as a hard core. You can have integration happen as a soft core, which goes through synthesis as only a small part of 25% of the system, which you start from the scratch and start from the RTL design, synthesis and all. And most of it you can plug in at the right appropriate time of a design flow and integrate them, and then really get the constraints. So imagine the complexity now. Initially, we had this as a flow, right? It was simple. So everything was under one control, under our control. Today, when you are getting code from multiple sources, you need to understand each of them, their design constraints, their interfaces, right? And how they work, and what kind of a constraint you need to have while integration in the front end, what kind of a constraint you need to have in the physical design, what kind of a clock tree you have to build for them. So if you see, at every stage, the complexity has increased in knowing our process as well as the course which we get from outside, from other sources. We need to understand them and then integrate them. Overall, we will be responsible for making the PPA achievable. Okay. So yeah, before the system gets, so this is what I would say is a design methodology change from what we had seen and what is being happening today. So that's a kind of a migration which has happened even in the design methodology. So we had the complete control of the design of a stock, but today you get cores readily available, but you need to understand each of their cores, their constraints, their interfaces to build a system. And of course, the complexity in the PPA, in achieving the PPA for the entire system as in total is really a complex thing today. And you need to really know your art best. So that is it. So again, this, I don't want to, I think I have stressed enough on this PPA requirements and the kind of complexity one has to understand to really realize the system of today, right? So again, PPA, when we are talking, there are again, for each of them, you have a design flow where the emphases are different. For example, low power. Low power, you need to know how exactly you partition your architecture. So which are the logic parts which has to be always on? How do you really, how does this work? So when do you turn on the other parts? When do you turn on other blocks? So, and accordingly, you need to have design specific thing, technology specific logic, and the functionality specific logic. So it is a complete understanding one needs to have. I don't think anybody would have taught you achieving low power to this depth, either or when you join the job and the thing. You have to be learning it on the job. On the job, you will be doing it. You will learn it on the job and experience by experience. So it is no longer it's a done deal, but you will be everyday learning kind of a thing. Okay, you have to try, experiment, iterate, and then see whether you achieve. So that is a kind of a mode one has to be following. Same is the case for timing as well as area also. So if you see SDA goals at various flows, various stages of the design. So to meet SDA goal, your focus has to be different, and you will every stage is an iterative process to achieve the PPA defined for the systems today. Okay, which was there then also, but I would say it was easy for us compared to what it is today. So of course the tools are also very supportive today. Tools are also very intelligent, and it will take load. But again, there is a huge need for a person, a VLSI a designer, to know his art to the best possible thing in detail. So knowing the art in detail matters a lot. Okay. So again, complexity, I think I'm stressing each one of this PPA here. Okay. And even the physical design. So this is a physical design. This is a floor plan one you have arrived at. How did you arrive at? What is the rationale behind putting this macro cell here? Why it is not oriented the other way, right? Why do you want to place it here? Why not here? So there are n permutation and combination possible. Today, probably these things are happening by the expertise of a physical designer, right? Probably he will try 10 times, he will try 11 times, probably 15 times, right? A best designer probably tries it 20 times and then finalizes the 21st architecture, right? But these kind of a technology, even in the tool, right? Tool algorithms, given it to a machine learning kind of a system, when you feed, probably the design data will be there for in all these tools. The tools are being used for this for years now, for decades now, right? So there is enough data which is available for these tools to learn and then permutate various combinations and then arrive at the PPA. And here, because it's a manual process, I have tried 20 times and 21st times I have reached this to get the PPA, doesn't mean that this is the optimum PPA which I could achieve. Whereas for the system, I can constrain the system to do it 100 times and then arrive at the PPA of my choice. So even over designing doesn't happen when I do a machine learning kind of a tool here. So today, the thinking is that even the tools are becoming smarter and intelligent to adopt such techniques wherever possible. The first example I've taken for floor plan is because this is the one where the machine can intelligently study the databases and the processes and then try some 1,000 different iterations and then give you the best orientation and the sizes of the floor plan for the desired PPA. So this is one of the examples. Of course, the design methodology also needs fine tuning, and imagine the kind of a responsibility of a designer. Now designers should know all the 1,000 times which the tool had tried and rejected it for what reason, right? So even it is the responsibility of the designer to understand. It cannot just let the tool do it for himself, right? He needs to understand when he was just enough to do 20 times and 21st time right. Today he has to know 1,000 times why the tool had done that orientation and rejected them, and then pick the 1,001th iteration, right? Very important to know that to make the system work the first time right. Very important. Again, the same is the case even for the IOs. IOs, why did you place it like this? Why not any other formats, right? So that also requires the tool can do a good job today with the machine learning. And so this is true for every stage of a design process. It is true for CTS. It is true why CTS tracks are like that, how the mesh is made at what metal and from where, how the stripes are drawn, how the railings are drawn, all these things, right? I mean, it's very, very important to for the designer to know how the tool algorithm works, and even the tool should give enough information, and the designer should know how the tool has functioned to arrive at give you a particular configuration. Same is the case for routing. So every stage, believe me, every stage has gone complex. And of course, the tools have become very intelligent and supportive for the designer. And designer, whatever the tool does, designer has to know it to that detail, whether to accept the design or to reject the design also. It is very, very important to know the complexity. So the point I'm making here is that, So whatever you learn, whatever you have learned in this project is not enough to do the right thing in the next project. That is the fact one has to accept. Okay, it is not that okay, I've got a distinction in my BE, I've got the highest, I've got the gold medal, I've got the degree, I have got the previous project that will help me. No, that will help you to an extent, but still there are chances that you need to really be concentrated on, and then be learning to get a newer challenges to face them. So it is very important. The continuous learning is very, very important. So here I would like to stop, and then my small contribution here is whatever I have learned over last 25 years, I have put it down in a form of a book. I mean, the intention was to really document my learnings. It was not to sell the book, or it was not to write for a student to know or anything. I mean, how I started this writing book is I wanted to record or document whatever learning I had gone through in couple of years, where I have contributed, I mean, where I have worked in the past. So that was the intention. But surprisingly, I'm figuring it out that this book is being used and being downloaded in a great scale, and it is of use to many people. So that is what was the first achievement, I would say. I just wrote this book which talks about, I will tell you what this book contains in a while. That was the intention of documenting my learnings into a format, which was this book. And Springer came to publish this, and I was very fortunate to get it published by Springer Nature. It's a global publishing house. And and that motivated me to write the Internet of Things, which is much happening today. And also the Industry 4.0, right? That is what you are going to see. That is where we are going to see the industrialization, automation, and everything around us being intelligent, being made intelligent. So that tempted me to continue this journey of writing my learnings into in the format of the book. And today I'm working on a physical design, and it is still work in progress. But this is already available in the market, and this is going to be published in any week from now. It's almost ready. Just waiting for a date to already pre-order is available. I mean, it's available for the pre-ordering. So so this is my journey about it. Just to briefly on what this book contains. So I had worked on starting from a simple VLSI circuit to system on chip, right? That was a progression which I was lucky to have. And hence I listed out, or I documented each of my learnings in these chapters. The chapter 1 introduces the system on chip, the trends in terms of complexity, die size, the frequency, and the kind of SOCs which I have seen in my career. And then chapter 2 is about the design and the design flow change which has happened over the years. Chapter 3 deals with the constituents, typical SoC. What all it contains? It contains a processor, and how do you choose a processor? It contains memory. How do you choose a memory? So what kind of memory you use? How do you do it? How do you configure it? How do you place it? How do you write constraint to it? How do you write a BIST around it? So the entire design process for the constituents, I mean, the design decisions which we make using this constituents. So that is discussed in chapter 3. Chapter 4 details the design process, the typical design process starting from HDL, Verilog, design, RTL modeling, and verification and all. Then chapter 5 discusses the SOC synthesis. 6 explains the static timing analysis. 7 deals with the testability, design for testability, that is a DFT, techniques for the SOC level. And chapter 8 deals with the verification plan, and the various, how do you verify the bug tracking in a practical way, because it is I want this to be used. If at all somebody wants to use it, I want it to be a reference book. Okay. So basically, even if a practicing engineer wants to refer to it, he should relate to what he is working on. So it really explains the system on chip design in a practical environment. Chapter 9 talks about physical design as a flow, and advanced physical design techniques for low power, for advanced technology, and for the preferred data path architectures. Then chapter 10, the physical design verification process. 11 talks about packaging technology. Once the die is out, it is tested on ATE. How to package them? What kind of option we have, and what kind of a design details we need to give them for packaging. So that is explained in chapter 11. Chapter 12 talks about a set of small design cases for people to try out. I don't want it to be a dry reading experience. So I had given small examples for them to try it out with the solution. So this has a RTL design, it has a verification test bench, and it has a sample simulation waveforms. So that, and then it has some scripts for synthesis and STA, various practically whatever we use, right? Those things are there. So now coming to the important question of how do you want to be successful? Basically, one needs to have a basic electronic circuit fundamentals, the knowledge of electronic circuit fundamentals, working knowledge of any of the hardware description language like system Verilog, and the knowledge on design flow, and the one project experience. See, nothing can match the practical experiences of a person. So it is very essential if you take up any simple project and executed it. If you want to design a simple, say, encryption core. So if you have written a RTL and if you have verified it, writing a test bench and then simulated it. So that experience is much more than actually talking about it. Okay, understanding the verification. Yes, it is required to verify the encryption core. That is not enough if unless you have given them a design flaw and then make sure that it works with the things, with the practical things. So this is a very much essential. One has to have this kind of a basic skill. And then obviously, as I said, it is not enough that, okay, you have learned it and you will become a VLSI expert. Like, I can't claim myself as a VLSI expert even after 30 years, right? So that is because it is everyday learning. Everyday things are changing. It is changing in design methodology. It is changing in the specification. It's changing in the requirement. I think it is necessary for us to understand that it is not if we have worked for one project, we have become an expert. So it's very wrong to say that. So it is very rare also to find the people who with that kind of a mental agility and flexibility to work in ever-changing environment. It is very difficult. So after 10 years, when I say, even in my voice, even in my attitude, even in my thing, probably I sound like an expert, right, for others. But that is not enough. That is not the kind of attitude one needs to have to work and be successful in VLSI. You have to have that kind of a flexibility to appreciate and work on the newer spec, newer, tighter design flow, or newer the environment or the management or the processes or the systems and strategies which we need to adopt. So you have to be always that curious student right? Attitude you should have for lifelong working environment in VLSI if you want to succeed, because it's ever changing. As the electronic gadgets are becoming obsolete so fast, even the design expertise also, you will have experience. That is a different thing. That will definitely come to your advantage for some time. But beyond that, you also need to be very flexible to know new things and be open to try new things to face the newest challenges. Then gender diversity and inclusion. So there are lack of female talent. It is nothing to do with oneself, but it is generally, right? Female talent is missing even in leadership role of any company. Okay, any thing. That is where hardly, imagine if there are just hardly 10% of the women in specialist positions, one can imagine the crunch there, right? I mean, I think it is required, and there is nothing wrong. I mean, it is not that women can't do that. So that is one thing. And probably women fits more into these kind of things when they have very multitasking requirements. And then when you have patience, when you need a lot of patience, I think it suits. But unfortunately, that is another thing which today's HR in VLSI industries are facing. Then challenges in market expansion, entry barriers. I think as a real estate professional, you don't have to worry. Designer, you don't have to worry very much, but the market barriers and all will be there, and it is a challenge for the marketing department, which is not a major thing, right? So then, so how to be successful? Again, I just thought, what do I talk about this? So basically, develop thyself. So you have to develop yourself. So we have to be learning. We have to be self-learning. Continuous learning is the key. And volunteer for additional projects and responsibilities. So there are a lot of opportunity available. There are a lot of information available online. Also, if you really want to collaborate, I mean, if you really want to learn, there's enough material available. It is only you have to decide where you want to go. You have to be very focused. Be open to collaborate. So don't hesitate to talk to people. So LinkedIn kind of a forum is very good, very interesting, and we can, without any kind of a prejudice or anything, we can collaborate. We can talk in professional terms, right? Which we were missing in our early career. So today, LinkedIn, you can just, I mean, this opportunity for me also talking to you all came up just by LinkedIn. So be open to collaborate, talk to people, and see how you can be of help. And don't hesitate. I mean, don't worry even if you don't, even if it is useless. Okay, probably not many times it succeeds, right? But be open to initiate that dialogue, and if it works, why not, right? It may work many times. So relocate if required. So don't have that very stringent attitude of, okay, no, I want to work only on analog. I want to work only on memory. No, open out, go find out what exactly is there. So in the other part of the design. So you have to be really flexible enough to take new work in a new thing. So don't hesitate to experiment. Very important. Network with people. Follow people. Follow whoever you feel successful in VLSI. Follow them. Find out what they talk. Find out what they're thinking, thought processes. Many things. Your social platforms are really good for all these things. Don't use it for any negative thing, but use it to your advantage. Very important. Follow successful people and learn from them. So all these things can happen, and I don't have to really teach you in detail this. I think it is just one's mindset. You can definitely follow people, and you can find out people who are really doing good in VLSI, find out the market leaders, find out the designers who have experienced, and then follow them. Then there are enough online resources available. You want to really do a static timing analysis, there are thousands of online resource materials which is available. There are instructor-led courses. So don't hesitate to join these courses, but do it and use it to your advantage, because all these training courses, right, has its own lifetime. So you can't expect this course. I have done this course, so I have to live my life. No, that is not possible. So if you have done this course, if it is useful for say 6 months, that is good. You use it and then finish it. Move on to the next course. So that should be the attitude. Okay, don't stick on to the thing. Okay, I have done a DFT course, so I have to find job in DFT only. No. So if you have done a DFT course, you can really do a simulation work. You can really do many other things related to that. You can validate the design, right? Design validation you can do. So there are a lot of things you have to develop to use whatever learning you have. More project-based learning institutes are available today, which you can really make use of. VLSI fundamentals and electrical fundamentals, brush up this, very important, because otherwise, unless you understand what is it required, you can't learn. So it's very much required to know what you need so that you can learn and do it. Then there are a lot of open source VLSI tools available today. I mean, these are lists I have listed out. For each of this, today there is a open source tool available, which wasn't the case 20 years back. We were depending on the major players like Cadence, Synopsys, Mentor Graphics, et al., and which were not easily accessible by everyone. But today you have open source tools which are good enough for you to start and then learn. So you get all the concepts here, and even the library, the PDKs are available free of cost today, and then you can try it out. And a lot of the big companies are supporting open source fabrication also, multi die fabrications, right? MPWs. So the multi-project projects are being offered by companies like Google and all. You can really explore whether you want to really that even the taking out is possible today. Open tools. You can try out all these things, and definitely it is. I would say it is an exciting time for to be in semiconductor industry. It's a great time because the kind of a growth which is happening in the industry is unbeatable. So, and even from the functionality point of time, it is fascinating to see how the systems are growing. I mean, offering you kind of high bandwidth and kind of storage. It is offering you like, which is enabling you to go do the cloud computing kind of applications, right? And the main thing is the data. Data, understand how the data processing has to be done, the algorithms required. So very, very important. 90% of the data in last 2 years, which has grown, which is phenomenal. And but only 2% is being analyzed today. So you can see the gap, right? So why it is not happening? Either data is not accessible, or there is enough data which we don't know how to analyze. So just see what is happening. I mean, just the fact that you know that this is what is happening around will give you some clue to really work on it, right? And then everywhere. I mean, the gen that I talked about, the appetite for data for the next generation guys. So the data is the key. Okay, data is a new oil, I would say. So the analytics, the analyzing techniques, the system processing techniques, and the system processors which is used in these analytical engines, all these are exciting opportunity, I think, which is there for you to explore. I think this is a little I wanted to share with you, and I hope I have done my bit right. And thank you for being here on Sunday morning, and it was really excellent talking to you all. And I feel that this 1 hour is spent really.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Veena. So as Dr. Veena was saying, I think we are in the world of continuous learning, and as in to be successful, as in I think we have to always stay learning, and that is the way it's gonna be. I'll just read out few questions for you, Dr. Veena. There were some interesting questions.
Sure.
Since we're short on time, I'll just try to read a few. So, okay, one of the interesting question is, as robotics and IoT, which is coming up in semiconductor industry, are the semiconductor engineers at risk of losing their jobs? What are your thoughts on that?
That was a fear we had even in our days. Also, we had these fears coming that we lose all the jobs. But even the robotics can take the job. But who are them? So that is from that the role of the people will change, but it will not really banish the person. And will continue to happen. Did I answer that question?
Yeah, I think so. There is another question. What is the average duration to produce a new generation of silicon chip? How long is the average lifespan of a silicon chip? How big should be the size of the team? Some interesting questions there.
Yeah. The first question, initially in our days, we used to take almost an average of 2 years to develop a chip on one of the technologies. We were working on 65 nanometer, 48 nanometer kind of technology, which we took 2 years. But now that has shrunk a lot. I mean, today people are taping out at 8 months to 1 year time frame. So the average time frame for tape outs have reduced. I think within 8 months to 1 year, people are taping out. Companies like Intel and Qualcomm are taping out in 8 months to 1 year. Because it's majority of the job today is integration.
Okay, so
I hope I
there is
answered
another
this question.
question. Please suggest some sources to learn about VLSI. I think there are a lot of, as Dr. Veena in her slides
Yeah.
also show, there are a lot of content available, both free and paid. There are a lot of training institutes. There is even as in if you're working somewhere, there are as in EDA companies also, they give their training for free. So I think there are a lot of opportunities to learn, and I think we just have to keep learning. There is another interesting question for you, ma'am. Why is our country lagging in making VLSI chips? What are the major reasons for this?
So who is saying this? We are lagging actually. The entire design centers are in India. The big players have their design centers in India. Yes, we don't have fab. We have defense fabs available as Sitar and SEL Chandigarh and all. But I don't think that is a necessary thing. The most exciting thing is designing, which we have here, which most of the design centers, most of the companies have the design centers in Bangalore, especially Bangalore, Noida, and Hyderabad. So most of the companies have design centers in India, and I don't think we are lagging in any way, and we can make system on chips using cutting edge technologies of say few nanometers. Today, Intel taped out recently 7 nanometer chip, which is getting productionized.
Okay. Okay, interesting question. As a woman, we usually have career gap. How does it affect our job chances and entering back into the VLSI industry? You want to share from your experience?
The first thing I would say is the career gaps really, yeah, it does affect if you are competing with your counterpart who is joined with you and has grown to some level without a career gap. But I think that we should leave it. That should not stop because the career gap which you have taken is because of your interest, right? It is not that somebody has forced you to get that gap. So I think it is your choice. As long as it is your choice, you can always gear up to the newer technology, newer roles, and then adopt it. It is the kind of a flexibility I talked about in my talk. So it is don't compare yourself with the position or the money your other colleague is getting. So if you have taken a career gap, it is your decision. It was your decision. So you move on. You have set your goals, right? So if you chase that, I think you should not have any kind of worries.
So another interesting question, as in for a fresher, what kind of entry barriers which are there to enter into VLSI? What should a fresher do to get a good internship and get into the job?
Yeah, that also I think I have answered it, but of course I'll answer it again because freshers, I do agree that whatever the curriculum suggests as a VLSI course is not good enough, but definitely that also gives you a kind of a how to study. How to study is taught in your engineering or in a graduation course or a PG course, right? But once you have that, there are a lot of other avenues which you can tap, and then you can choose your career. That shouldn't be a problem at all. In today's times, you have all the resources at your disposal. You have to know what you want to do. If you want to be a VLSI designer, find out what VLSI design resources you have, where all you can get the help from. There are a lot of training institutes. There are a lot of instructor-led courses which you can do and really get into the career. You shouldn't worry about that at all. It's not a kind of a disadvantage. Even while doing your graduation and post PG course, you can do these extra courses. Only thing is you have to determine yourself to be in the side. I think, did I answer?
Thank you.
I don't know.
Let me take the last question. Okay, this comes up again and again. Analog versus digital. Which stream we should pick up?
I'm sorry,
Sure.
I lost your voice.
Let me repeat the question. So another interesting question which comes up a lot: analog versus digital design, which is good for long term?
I would say both are equally good, both are equally challenging. It all depends on whether you want to really restrict yourself to analog and be specialized in analog. So that is a call one needs to take. The system gives you a global perspective where you can really go go and see the from a larger perspective. Whereas analog restricts yourself to your individual contribution, and there are enough challenges. It is not that your job will go away in short time. No, analog designers are in high demand. Analog and RF designers are in high demand because of the specialization which it offers. I mean, the kind of you cannot automate analog design, right? So you don't have a kind of a support system which the digital design has. So from that you become specialist. So there's no long-term thing gain in digital versus analog. So both are equally long-term.
Okay, one more last question which just came up. Is MTech really necessary for entering into VLSI industry?
No, not at all. It all depends on what you want to do. So if you want to do getting into VLSI industry, you start gathering the skill set needs early in stage during the graduation, and you can really work on it and then attend the extra courses and then acquire those skills. No, it is not a mandatory thing that you have to have an MTech, but having an MTech, because there are MTechs specifically for VLSI that will cover VLSI related courses. So that is why it becomes an advantage, but otherwise it's not necessary at all.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Veena. This was really informative and a lot of experience sharing from you to the new engineers. Thanks a lot. That brings us to the end of our session. We'll be posting recording in case someone has missed. Thanks a lot, Dr. Veena, again to be a guest speaker for this session.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Yeah, thanks a ton for giving me this opportunity, and all the best, guys. I think it was a pleasure talking to you on this Sunday.